Good morning. Today is Thursday, April 11th, 2024. Sometimes I don't want to be right. On June 6, 2022, I spoke to you about the United States Supreme Court ruling overturning Roe versus Wade. That was the law that guaranteed a woman's right to choose an abortion in the United States. And I criticized that ruling of overturning Roe, and I tried to explain my position. But I said something then, and I repeated it elsewhere at the time, and each time I said this, people thought I was crazy. I said, leaving aside for a moment the question of abortion, this ruling has the potential to impact fertility treatments. People who want to have a baby will not be able to if states write their laws based on the extreme Christian position that from the moment an egg is fertilized, even if it is outside of the body in a petri dish, that is a person, according to their belief, whose life must be protected. Because if that's the case, then fertility treatments will not be able to take place, because fertility treatments often require fertilizing multiple eggs and inserting only those with the best chance of leading to a healthy birth. If they can't eliminate the unneeded embryos before implantation, fertility clinics will not be able to do their work, and they will close. And when I said that, almost 2 years ago, intelligent people, thought I was crazy and could not see the connection between those two subjects. Until February 16th, 2024. Because on that date, just under 2 months ago, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that embryos created and stored in a medical facility, we're talking about embryos that had never been implanted, must be considered children under the state's law governing harmful death. At that time, the ruling was cheered by anti-abortion activists nationwide. They have long argued that life begins at conception, and here for the first time was a court, and it's the Alabama Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of the state of Alabama. They define conception even outside of the body, in a petri dish, as included in that definition. But the most immediate effect of that decision was on fertility patients that were trying to get pregnant, not women trying to end their pregnancy, because all of a sudden, the places that they were getting treatment stopped giving it. Eduardo Medina wrote in the New York Times about two women. Natalie Broomfield, age 41, cried as she read about the Alabama Supreme Court's ruling that embryos and test tubes should be considered children. A mother of 7, including 2 babies conceived through in vitro fertilization, Mrs. Broomfield felt that one of her cherished beliefs as a Christian had been affirmed. Life, she said, begins when embryos form, even if it's outside of the body. So she cried tears of joy. Emily Capilouto, age 36, also cried because of the ruling, but her tears were prompted by despair. She had struggled for years to have a child. Now she was nearing the end of an IVF cycle when one of the embryos she and her husband had produced would be transferred to her uterus. But the day before, she learned that her clinic at the University of Alabama at Birmingham Health System was halting IVF treatments in response to the ruling. She had no appointment. And the irony is that this ruling has forced many couples who are trying to have a baby, who cannot have a baby any other way, for whom these fertility treatments is the only ticket to parenthood. And now, because of this ruling, they can't have a baby. The University of Alabama at Birmingham, it's one of the largest fertility clinics in the state, said they were halting the procedures to evaluate the potential that our patients and our physicians could be prosecuted criminally or face punitive damages for following the standard care for IVF treatments. Now, you should know that the Supreme Court, Alabama Supreme Court Chief Justice, his name is Tom Parker, he used a lot more than United States law in his decision. He wrote, "Human life cannot be wrongfully destroyed without incurring the wrath of a holy God." He quoted Genesis, the prophet Isaiah, the prophet Jeremiah, and he quoted at length from the writings of Christian 16th and 17th century theologians. He added, even before birth, all human beings have the image of God, and their lives cannot be destroyed without effacing his glory. Well, just as an understatement, he's quoting from our books, our Torah. And we certainly do not understand them to mean what he thinks they mean. In any event, the opposition to this ruling was enormous. So enormous that politicians realized they had to do something to fix this and to do it fast. And about 2 weeks later, the Alabama legislature approved legislation making it possible for fertility clinics in the state to reopen. The problem is that this law, which was written very hastily, has only created more chaos and led to more questions because it does not answer the question, one of the central questions, about embryos that have been frozen and stored for possible future implantation. Do they have the legal status as human beings? It doesn't answer that question. This law also requires that a woman who is undergoing fertility treatment give up their right to sue if something goes wrong. And many other questions were left unanswered by this hastily written law. And here's the result. So again, you have a state Supreme Court ruling. You have a legislator that writes a law to protect fertility clinics in response. 3 weeks later, the beginning of April, the hospital doing the most fertility treatments in the state announced that they were ending all fertility treatments. They said there's a lack of clarity in the recent state legislation. We don't know what's going to happen. There are too many questions. We're putting ourselves at risk. We're closing. Hannah Peterson, a spokesman for the hospital, cited pending legislation and the lack of clarity in the recently passed IVF legislation in the state of Alabama. And right now, in the state of Alabama, it is much harder to get fertility treatment. That's with a law that is supposed to protect it because of the specter that the law is unclear. The Alabama Supreme Court ruling stands, and professionals are not going to do their work if they're not protected. Women now have to travel long distances for repeated trips out of state to be able to get the care that they need in order to have a baby, not in order to have an abortion. And if you think that this is an anomaly in the United States, okay, well, it's Alabama. If you're paying attention to this issue in the United States, the recent rulings in Florida, the recent ruling in Arizona, and efforts in many more states, I predict that this is just the beginning of the reduction of fertility treatment options for women who need them in the United States. Again, leaving aside abortion. This weekend, we highlight the work of Yesh Tikva, as we do every year at this time. Yesh Tikva, which literally means there is hope, is a wonderful organization based in the United States, but they serve people all over the world. It provides support and resources for those Jewish families who are going through fertility issues, which affects 1 in 6 couples. 1 in 6. And at this moment, certainly in the United States, but one thing we see from this is you never know. You never know where this become an issue elsewhere. And for everyone who says, well, it could never happen here, and I'm not describing where here is, wherever you want to say here is, well, that could never happen here. I think most people would have said that about the United States 10 years ago. Well, that could never happen here. We have a constitutional law, Roe v. Wade. It could never happen here. And so I think it is appropriate that we make ourselves knowledgeable about this subject, and that we must advocate and support the efforts to have children through fertility centers. And that treatment must be legal, and it must be accessible everywhere. And the religious definition of one group cannot be imposed on others by a secular government that promises religious freedom for all its citizens. Religious freedom, at its most basic means, you can't use your religion and enforce it on me. And that is precisely what Judge Parker did, and many others like him. I hope that we will advocate and support that certainly Jewish women everywhere who are in this situation of wanting or needing fertility treatments should be able to get them. They should be legal. They should be accessible. And with God's help, they should be successful. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.